I want to present to you the president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, who I've known for many years. She was an English teacher, middle school English teacher for 13 years, not only here in Minnesota, but out in the area where I'm from. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, and then came back here. And not only was she a teacher, but she also received her national certification. You know that process you can go through to become a nationally certified teacher. She did that, but in 2005, she was elected as the president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers and has been doing that ever since. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce to you Mary Cathryn Ricker.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. So first, I want to say thank you so much to Grant and Don for inviting me for this opportunity. And a broader thank you as well for being so active in the education community and making sure that a discussion stays vibrant, stays in the forefront, and stays so open. That you, and the variety of topics you have, and the speakers you have, and the openness you have shown to debating and discussing ideas is very refreshing. And so I do appreciate not only this personal invitation to talk today, but I very much appreciate folks coming together to just listen and debate and discuss. And thanks for the introduction. I was a middle school English teacher for 13 years, and so there are times when I think nothing about teaching middle school prepared me for this job. And then there are those days where I realize teaching middle school is exactly what prepared me for this job. Or prepared anyone for any job, so I highly recommend it if you are looking for a career change. And I'll start very quickly. I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about the schools St. Paul children deserve and the process we came to get there. But I want to start with first with the overall philosophy we have at the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. We are a union of about 3,500 education professionals. Those are the teachers, educational assistants, and school and community service support professionals in St. Paul Public Schools. And we like to say we are organizing for excellence. And that sounds great, and all of you should say, well, so what does that mean? And what it means for us is that we have to be solution driven. That we can certainly spend time being angry or being disheartened about other people's solutions. But if we don't step forward with our own solutions, we're only doing sort of half the work. And so organizing for excellence means being solution driven, and it means focusing on those standards we all have as individual teachers, but then as a union we get to act collectively on. Because that at the heart is a union's work, to act collectively. And so early on, we realized that our contract could be the most powerful document we had to attract and retain a high quality, diverse workforce that knew how to meet the needs of our students and their families. And so that mouthful is really what drives us. There are lots of other things we do. We have a very extensive professional development program in our union. We may have heard a little bit about our parent-teacher home visit project because it was just featured on the Today Show, which it was so exciting to see the leaders of that work have their work lifted up. And at the end of the day, all of our work comes down to the fact that our contract could be, right now that is our most powerful document, but it could be for everyone the most powerful document we collectively have, that our teachers have, that our community has, that our school district has, to attract and retain a high quality, diverse workforce that knows how to meet the needs of our students and their families. And so we have taken that attitude, that mission, into our contract negotiations for over the past 9 years. And it has resulted in a number of things. And I'll highlight a couple things in the past, and then I'll talk about right now. So for example, one of the things that meant in high quality, so that high quality, diverse workforce that knows how to meet the needs of its students and their families. So the high quality portion is we worked really hard with the district to come up with a peer assistance and review program that knew how to meet the needs of all of our teachers. Not just our struggling teachers, although we started making sure that their needs were met. Not just our probationary teachers, to make sure that tenure is never an accident, although we wanted to make sure that was true too. But also that wide swath of strong teachers who otherwise are treated like the smart kid in the back of the classroom that nobody pays attention to because they're not needy, when really we are all needy. And so we created a peer assistance and review program that made sure that tenure was never an accident in St. Paul Public Schools for our probationary teachers. Made sure that if a struggling teacher wanted support to improve, they got it. And we had a process for determining whether they improved or not. And making sure that our strong teachers had access to that same sort of intensive support for a variety of things strong teachers want it for, right? For earning your national board certification like I did. Maybe you're changing grade levels. You're going from 3rd grade to 5th grade, and that can sometimes be an entirely different experience. And you're the sort of conscientious teacher that wants to make sure you hit the ground running with those 5th graders. Right? Or maybe you go from teaching history to teaching English language arts because you're licensed in both. And again, you're the sort of conscientious teacher that says, I don't want to spend time struggling and trying to figure out if I'm good at teaching English again or not. I want to hit the ground running, and so I am a strong teacher. I am looking for that support. So that's one example of one of the first things we did around high quality teaching. The second thing we did around high quality teaching was to make sure, and this was actually a bigger fight than I anticipated it being, but any teacher who was seeking a leadership position, and we wanted it to be any leadership position, but we ended up agreeing to it being a leadership position within our own bargaining unit. Any teacher who was seeking a leadership position had to have an evaluation on file in the last 12 months showing they met the standards of effective teaching. So you want to go from classroom teacher to a building coach or a curriculum coordinator or an administrative intern? Great. Good luck in the application process. Please make sure you get evaluated before you do that so that we can determine that at the very least you're a strong teacher before you go seeking your leadership position. And so we did, so those are some of the teaching quality things we won by having that attitude. The diverse workforce part. So this was something we absolutely dedicated ourselves to over the past 9 years, and we've done a variety of things. A couple things that made their way into our contract. For example, we won language that identified future educators of St. Paul as a recognized program in St. Paul Public Schools, so that it can now have an advisor. It can now function in every secondary school where there's an advisor interested in doing it. And we did this because in our research on how to better diversify our workforce, one of the things we found anecdotally when I was speaking to teachers who came from communities of color and just said, what attracted you into, like, let me learn from you first. How did we get you in teaching, and how did we get to keep you in teaching? And what I learned is a lot of those folks I was talking to in St. Paul were graduates of St. Paul Public Schools themselves, which on the one hand is something to just be really proud of and shout from the rooftops. And on the other hand, I thought, oh my gosh, we are overlooking one of the greatest resources we have. You know, I don't know how many of you have had the chance to be in St. Paul Public Schools lately, but if you haven't, please go, because we have one of the most gorgeous cross-sections of the world attending our schools every single day. And what a perfect pool to entice into a career in teaching. If we are going to diversify Minnesota's teaching force in the future, those future teachers are coming from St. Paul Public Schools, and probably Minneapolis too, but my day job's on that side of the river, so I like to say St. Paul. And so we have these we won recognition of future educators of St. Paul. The longest program's been operating at Como Senior High for the last 4 years. You are welcome to go visit. Nancy Solo Taylor is the advisor there. She's got this gorgeous group of kids who are just exploring a career in teaching as one of their clubs. You know, like joining chess club or like being on the speech team. She has over 24 students every year who spend time with her visiting college campuses, talking to other career educators, doing some near-peer tutoring to get a hang of what it's like to try to transfer knowledge from them to someone else. It's really a fabulous program. So there's one thing we did, and there are many things we know we need to do to diversify the profession. But we also wanted to make sure that our contract attracted a diverse professional as well. And so one of the other things we did is, it took us 6 years, but we won citizenship leave.
which is fairly unique. We're the only school district we're the only teachers union in the country that has citizenship leave in our contract language. And so that is, if you would like, if you are not a citizen, then you can use time off, use up to 3 days off for you or a member of your immediate family to seek citizenship in the United States. And we did this for a variety of reasons. One, some of our teachers are not U.S. citizens, and perhaps they don't originally intend to become U.S. citizens, but then they decide they would like to be U.S. citizens. And I, as someone who was born into my citizenship, do not have to use any of my personal time to do that work. And so one of the things we saw, and this is the work we've been doing in the last 6 years that got lifted up for us, is if we want to scrub institutional bias from our contract to make sure that someone who is, does not fit the dominant stereotype in our country of being white, Christian, male, heterosexual, etc., then we need to find those ways that help level the playing field for our diverse staff as well. And this was one of those things we realized. And these actually came from, again, as we were interviewing our own members who came from diverse communities about what attracted them to teaching and that sort of thing. This actually started popping up about members themselves who were not citizens yet, members who had parents who were not citizens yet, and one of the things holding them back from helping their parents get citizenship was time to help their parents get citizenship. And we said, and so after three times of trying, we finally got it. So again, attracting and retaining a diverse, high-quality workforce that knows how to meet the needs of its kids. And so for the knows how to meet the needs of its students and its families, one last thing I will share with you before I move on is a few years ago, the Minnesota legislature approved a site-governed schools law. And I know Joe Nathan is familiar with it. Is anyone else familiar with it? Oh, great. Okay. Well, of course you are, Ted. I'm sorry. Yes. Because Education Evolving really helped educate me on the potential of this law. And so I have experts in the room who I'm a little embarrassed to try to characterize this law in front of, because I don't know if I will say it as well as they would. But the power of the site-governed schools law, in my opinion, is it allows teachers to maintain all of the muscle of the school district, especially a school district the size of St. Paul, and at the same time gives us the agility to act like a charter school. And so that was a pretty powerful combination to me. And so I don't know that the ink was dry on the legislation, and we brought a proposal to the negotiating table saying we would like to put together a committee. Well, I'll be honest, we actually went to the negotiating table with a full-fledged way of proposal for what the policy should be to become a site-governed school. And our district said, we didn't help you write this, and so we actually said, you're right, we should come up with this together. So we withdrew the proposal that had the full policy already written, and we said, well, let's come up with a committee then to explore site governance. And so that was, again, this idea of teachers who know how to meet the needs of our students and their families, making sure our contract empowers them. Because we do believe that the closer a decision gets made to students, generally the more relevant that decision is to their students and their families. And site governance is a great institutional example of that. Fast forward a little bit, unfortunately, the committee, it didn't end up coming up with a formal proposal. The district decided that a path to site governance was not a priority for them. But that does actually play into some of our more recent contract negotiations, which brings me to the school St. Paul children deserve. And so there are a couple things in background you should know. And one of the things you may already know is that in the state of Minnesota, all public employee negotiations are considered open meetings. So the public can come watch us negotiate whether we want you to or not. And so we looked around a few years ago, actually 3 contracts ago, and we said, would we say anything? Have we been saying anything that we wouldn't want someone to hear? whether we know them or not, and we thought about it and thought, no, not really. So why not make sure that the people know we're negotiating? And so 3 contracts ago, we tried it, and we actually tried it with our special education community first, because we were really trying to get some more solid supports in our special education community. And so we had meetings where we had a handful of special ed teachers there. We had a meeting where we had some parents and teachers there, and it went really well. I can't say that we ended up getting all the contract language we wanted, but it ended up being that dip your foot in the pool experience that said, this is not scary. This is actually invigorating. It is invigorating to share this process with other people. So then 2 years ago, last contract, we said, you know, one of the things was people asking us, like calling up and asking, like, when do you negotiate? And so we just set a timetable. It was like a metronome. It was every Thursday from 5 to 7 at the SPFT office until we're done. And that was the schedule. And so we got fewer calls because everybody just knew they could make it or not. And again, it became a very invigorating process to have people stay after and tell us what they thought of our proposals, tell us what we forgot in our, you know, like, hey, did you ever think of negotiating this? It ended up being this living, breathing thing. And at the end of the day, so as I was reflecting about this time last year, about contract negotiations coming up and knowing that we would want them to be, we would want to embrace the publicness of those negotiations again. One of the things I realized was that even though we had invited the public in to be part of our negotiations, we were still inviting you all in to just say, hey, here are our ideas. What do you think of them? And so they were still our ideas. And going back to our philosophy, if our contract was really going to be the document that we believed could attract and retain a high-quality, diverse workforce who knew how to meet the needs of our students and their families, it needed to contain all of those things that we felt were priorities for our students. It needed to not just be about the wages and benefits of teachers, which it's okay if it's that. I am still a trade unionist. I do believe in negotiating the wages and benefits of our teachers and our EAs and our school and community service professionals. And again, it could also reflect the schools St. Paul children deserve. So last year in November, before I even picked a bargaining team, before we even assembled bargaining teams for any of our bargaining units, we put out a call through various means. We sent out emails to people we knew. We sent out emails to places like Parents United, who we knew had active parents in St. Paul. We sent out emails to, or we put things up on Facebook, or you know, shared at membership meetings, or went out to parent-teacher organizations, went out to some community members we knew, and we said, we'd like to put together a couple book groups, a couple study groups, book clubs, whatever you would want to call them. And we want them to be made up equally of our members and people who were not our members, parents, community members, etc. And we ended up getting about 22 people interested. And so we broke them up into 2 study groups. And we gave one group we wanted to focus on the teaching profession, and the other group we wanted to focus on the school learning environment. And so we gave the teaching profession book club the book called Teaching 2030, which is written by the National Teacher Quality, no, it's not, the one out of North Carolina.
Barnett Berry.
Yes, Barnett Berries, exactly. And Barnett and I talked about this when we were together in Helsinki. So we gave them that book, and we said, here are a group of forward-thinking teachers who thought about what the profession should look like in the year 2030. We'd like you to use this as your mentor text, but then pull in anything else you want, pull in your own interviews with teachers, pull in your own experiences, etc., and tell us what you think. And then this other group, we gave them the copy of Alfie Kohn's book, The Schools Our Children Deserve. And we said, again, use this as your mentor text and read through it, but again, pull in whatever you like. If you see a great story on Education Week, pull that in. If you see an editorial in the Star Tribune, pull that in. Like, use that as your mentor text. And we gave both groups three overarching questions. And we said, we gave them very explicit instructions. We said, we want you to come back to us in April with recommendations for the priorities you have that you'd like to see in our contract. And we said, here are your three questions to sort of guide you. 1, what are the schools St. Paul children deserve? 2, who are the teachers St. Paul children deserve? And then 3, what is the profession those teachers then deserve? And so we said, talk about those 3 big questions. Use these mentor texts. Pull in whatever other resources you want. We actually hired Dr. Rosalind Carroll, a retired professor from Hamline University, to facilitate these conversations, because I wanted to make sure I was not facilitating these conversations, because I didn't want people to think like they were talking to the union president who wanted to make sure she heard this. I wanted a community leader to be the facilitator, and Dr. Carroll complied. I also specifically personally asked Dr. Carroll, because I know she is an expert at leading conversations around equity, specifically around racial equity, and also around all equity. Because there were 2 things. 1, that was very important for us, for these to be equity-based conversations. And 2, practically, of the 22 people who were interested, we had an overpopulation of people who looked like me. And I thought, if there are voices absent, and we tried to reach a diverse group, and we didn't entirely succeed, and I still wanted to make sure that voices were absent, could still be brought into the room. And having been in conversations with Dr. Carroll, I knew she was very adept at that, at making sure we look around the room and we say, who haven't we heard from? Who's not here to speak up for themselves? Or, she can do it much better than I can, so I apologize for my very basic reflection of that. And so having her lead this work was really important to us, and she agreed, which I am very grateful for. And so then these study groups spent November, December, January, February, March meeting themselves. They also held 2 larger listening sessions, one on December 10th that attracted about 40 people, and one on March 2nd that attracted about 65 people. To also throw those questions out to a broader group of parents and teachers and community members and education support professionals and students. We were very, very excited that one of our community members who was participating brought 10 students to the second listening session. I also spent time in Nancy Solo Taylor's Future Educators of St. Paul club one afternoon, pitching those same 3 questions to them. And I had a student there scribing all the things the students were saying about the schools they thought they deserved, the teachers they thought they deserved, and then the sort of profession, as people contemplating teaching as a profession, the sort of profession they thought they deserved to walk into. And we gave all of that material right back to the study groups and said this came from about 24 students at Como Senior High. We had another member of one of the subgroups do a little bit of that work with some of his students at Harding as well, to throw that all into the mix. So those study groups took all of this, like a whole winter's worth of work, and stirred it all up, and it turned into the School St. Paul Children Deserve. They came to our April executive board meeting, and by this time, while they were doing all of that work, I was assembling negotiating teams for all three of our bargaining units, and making sure the people who were asking to join our negotiating team knew that this other work was happening. They came to our April executive board meeting and presented these 7 priorities, as well as the documentation behind them. And they said, we would like you to adopt these as your negotiation priorities for the 2013-15 contract. And our executive board members had conversations with them, adopted them, and then directed our bargaining teams to use these as their priorities. And so May 2nd, we hustled and we put together 29 proposals, and I brought a few copies. I don't have enough for everybody, but a couple different things. You're welcome to stop by the St. Paul Federation of Teachers and pick up your own copy if you don't get one today. But you're welcome to just peruse it today too if you'd like to see a few of them. That document is the reflection of the school St. Paul children deserve in its proposals, as well as a few of those proposals that tend to show up in between negotiation sessions. So for example, there is a proposal in there about teachers being assigned classrooms and making sure that if they are being told their building is closing, they get told that they'll get boxes and their furniture will be moved, and those sorts of things that were all the sort of things that are helping us prevent workers' compensation claims and those sorts of things. So you will find some of those sort of dotting I's and crossing T's sort of negotiation items, but by and large, the majority of the 29 are a reflection of the schools St. Paul children deserve. And so you can see on page 2 of that, our 7 priorities very quickly. These are not in ranked order, but I will say the first one, just to draw your attention, is education for the whole child. This was something that the study groups, in looking at the transcripts of their discussions, the study groups kept coming back to students having access to supports and more enriching curriculum. That's kind of what it boils down to. Do you want a smaller one? And so these are things like making sure all students have access to a school nurse, counselor, social worker, a librarian. Right now we have 10 librarians for 38,000 students. And we believe you cannot say with a straight face that you expect students to be college and career ready when in Anoka Hennepin, every school has a librarian. In Maple Grove, every student has access to a librarian. And in St. Paul, we have 10 library media specialists for 38,000 students. With our expectations of information literacy of our students today, we need them to have access to those information literacy experts. And we want to also make sure they all have some equity in their access to art and music and physical education. I am very excited. I don't know if many of you heard about this already, but it's a pretty astute audience. The research that just came out about girls in particular, their access to physical activity increases their science attainment. Now, they were very clear when I listened to the story that they didn't say there was causality, but there was a high correlation. And I think that can't be, it warrants more interest. Family engagement was another one. We had, in the last round of contract negotiations, we had won recognition of our parent-teacher home visit project, and we wanted to expand that recognition to also include parent-teacher academic teams, and I can talk about that a little bit too. Because one of the things that kept coming out of these study groups and the listening sessions we had was folks who wanted more authentic engagement. They didn't want those cattle call conferences anymore. They just said, it's a waste of time. And I actually just got a postcard from my son's middle school where it said, please limit your conferences to 5 minutes. And I thought, I got a lot to talk about. And I don't know if I can limit it to 5 minutes. And so I want more meaningful involvement as a parent. And in the last round of negotiations, we were not successful in negotiating more flexible parent-teacher conference styles. And so this time we want to go at with a very specific idea around these parent-teacher academic teams that are a new way of parents and teachers engaging together on the work their children are doing, as well as the progress they are making. And so, so that was really important to us. Just a quick conversation about our parent-teacher home visit project, because home visits are nothing new. Historically, in the school system, a home visit is a deficit-based home visit, though. It's about getting some special ed paperwork signed. It's about counting the number of books you have. It's about coming to find out why your child was truant, right? Those are all deficit-based reasons for a home visit. This turns it on its head. This says if those home visits need to keep occurring, then they should keep occurring. Our home visit project is about making sure that we engage in the work of our students as partners. So the very first, so it's voluntary. The family does not have to say, yes, you can come to my home. Like they have to want it too, right? The teacher has to want to do them. And then that very first home visit in a year, you choose students sort of randomly. Do not profile your students with the home visit because Students are smart. They will pick up right away that you're only visiting the homes of kids who have low test scores, or you're only visiting the homes of, kids who don't come to school on time. They're smart. They will pick that up. You do not profile your students. You pick a cross-section of students to visit. And the very first conference, you go to the home, or you go to you meet at the library, you meet at a coffee shop, or we try not to do it in the school. But we'd certainly, if parents are more comfortable with that, we're open to that. And you ask only 2 questions, and you do a lot of listening. First question in a home visit is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And then the second question is, how can we support you in getting them there? And you just listen. And then later on in the spring, you follow up, and then hopefully there's been interaction, right? You've seen each other at maybe the Harvest Festival, or the book night, or the math and literacy night. And then you go back and you ask for a home visit again in the spring. And then you check in, and you can also do some forward planning. So, next year Michael's going to be an 8th grader. How are you feeling about that? Do you have any questions about what 8th grade's going to be like? Is there anything I can help you with at the end of the school year? But again, you're treating this like a partnership. And so we want to expand that home visit work and that authentic family engagement work. We also want to keep improving our class size language. That came out of our study groups as well. And so we did win class size language during the last round of negotiations. And it's a great place to start. It was really mindful work. We started here with wanting to make sure they were hard caps on class sizes, and the district started here by saying they didn't want to talk about it, and hard caps would be impossible because if I capped your class at 24 and you get student number 25 in February, what are we supposed to hire a whole new teacher for student number 25? And we said, well, that's absolutely not our intention, so okay, let's figure out where we can get to a place where, we started actually with agreement that class size actually matters for a whole host of reasons. And so this time we'd like to actually hone in on that class size language so it's actually even more dependable to the families who are looking for some sustainability and some dependability around our class size language. And then we have an emphasis on teaching, not testing. This was one of the things the parents who came to our study groups and our listening sessions were absolutely rabid about. And I mean, we had teachers talking about it too, but we had so many people say, how many days are you testing, or pre-testing, or practice testing? And it was a lot. And so we came up with 2 things. One of the proposals we have is that our district opt out as a district out of the MCAs. The second proposal we have is that teachers have authority in choosing the standardized test that would best meet their needs for the diagnosis they need about their students. So there are a whole swath of standardized tests out there, the MCAs being one of them. There are Mondo tests for our reading program. There are MAP tests in reading and math. There are access tests for our English language learners. There are additional tests if you're a special education student. And then there are all of the pre-tests and practice tests that go with all of those things. And what we found is some of our teachers really value their MAP data. They don't really value their Mondo data, for example. And for other teachers, it was vice versa. They felt like the Mondo was kind of that finger on the pulse they needed, and the MAP data was kind of intrusive to their classroom teaching, and they want to get that time back. And so we said, why not ask the teacher teams, what is the more valuable for you, and take care of testing that way. The other thing we're emphasizing is culturally relevant education. Now this is something you have hopefully have also heard quite a bit of our school district leaders talking about. They talk about making sure that there is equity in our system. And we actually think our contract is a great place to talk about that equity as well. What do we mean by that? Then therefore, how could our contract support that? We want to make sure, and we wanted to be explicit about this, that you may not know, but St. Paul Public Schools has the highest percentage of teachers of color in the state of Minnesota. Across the state of Minnesota, there are about 4% of our teachers come from communities of color. In St. Paul, it's 15%. What we like to say about that is we are proud but not satisfied with that number at all. And no district has tried harder. And at the same time, when I told you a little earlier about that evidence collecting I was doing about how to diversify our workforce, I actually had one of my members who is a teacher of color, grew up in St. Paul Public Schools, is now teaching in St. Paul Public Schools, and she said, you know, Mary Cathryn, one of the things that makes me most angry is that everybody says they want to diversify the workforce, but they all treat us, and she is a woman of color, they all treat us like some of us don't already exist. Why doesn't, and she said, I mean, she's a veteran teacher, she's taught longer than me, and she said, why are you the first person who's asked me why I went into teaching and why I've stayed? And that hit me hard. That hit me really hard. That here's a marginalized, here's a group of professionals who come from a marginalized population, and we have just made them invisible in their own population. And so one of the things we really want to emphasize in this round of contract negotiations is, if we have the highest percentage in the state, then let's talk to them first about how we diversify this profession. And let's use our contract to do that. Let's figure out how our contract can best support our professionals who come from communities of color to then increase the number of professionals we have from communities of color. Next, high quality professional development for teachers. This is practically related to all of the other things we talked about, and that is that as much attention that has been paid to improving professional development for our teachers, we are still too much leaning on those sort of one-shot professional development seminars that then nobody follows up on to see, you know, okay, so we sent Mary Cathryn here to learn about restitution. Nobody then walks into my classroom and says, is she practicing anything she learned? And if she's not, are we asking her, what's holding you back, Mary Cathryn? You know, we sent you to that 7-hour seminar, we got a sub for you. Why aren't we seeing anything different? And then I can tell you, you know what, it was really hard, like I need someone to coach me, or I need to go see it in action. I heard it intellectually, but now I need to see what it's like. So again, we want to use our contract to talk about what a stronger professional development program looks like so that we can release ourselves from that reliance. And that would also mean that we're giving teachers more power around their professional development, but we think there's a real opportunity with our new state teacher evaluation law for this actually to become, you know, a natural part of that evaluation, and actually mandated in state law, is that you develop a professional development plan based on what your evaluation says. Well, you know, that is an absolutely brilliant concept. That you look at my teaching, you see where my strengths are, so maybe I can actually assist teachers in this area, and you see where my weaknesses are, and now you target those weaknesses. And they're not the same weaknesses for all 30 English teachers in the secondary level. And so it might have to be a little more individualized, and I might get a little more say in what I need support on. And then finally, access to preschool. Again, I'm a little humbled in this room with Todd Otis right in front of me to talk to you all about how important early learning is. And in Minnesota, I really, you know, all of our Minnesota humility can go away in saying that I feel like we have broad agreement on this. And in St. Paul Public Schools, I also will let my Minnesota humility go away and say we have a 4-year-old program that is out of this world. When we were knocking on doors for the levy referendum a couple years ago, our district had compiled statistics that said over 87% of the students who go through our 4-year-old program are ready for kindergarten, as measured by the kindergarten readiness standards we've adopted as a school district. Less than half of the students who don't go through our 4-year-old program are ready for kindergarten. Those are pretty compelling statistics. Those statistics convinced us when we talked about what could we as a district do to assure access to preschool, what could our contract do to assure access to preschool, that said we should act on. Like, that is knowledge we should act on. And so we learned that even with the support we were getting for our 4-year-old program from various places, that we still had 700 students on our waiting list. So there's demand for our 4-year-old program, which should be very flattering, but we should do something about that demand. And so one of the proposals we have is we want our contract to guarantee the community that every 4-year-old, every family who wants their 4-year-old to have access to that program should have it. And so we would like our contract to be the place where we're making that commitment to the community. Because then it is personality proof. Right? Then it is, you know, no matter who is superintendent or who the chair of our school board is or who your union president is, like, it's there. And you have to go through the community and the teachers and everyone else to get it out of there. And so that's one of the things we'd like to see. And we actually think one of the added benefits, you know, so one of the first things we said when we presented this 4-year-old program proposal to the district is we said, because of the state has agreed to pay for all-day kindergarten now, we have all-day kindergarten money from our referendum. We can then move to push into our 4-year-old program. And we may actually be able to, for the first time, turn our Montessoris into true Children's House Montessoris and even start them with 3-year-olds. Because if there are folks in here who know the Montessori philosophy, they like a 3 to 6-year-old children's house. And right now in St. Paul, we do a 4 to 6-year-old children's house. So there is potential there for turning those children's houses of the Montessoris into a true 3 to 6-year-old children's house. And so those are the 7 priorities that make up the School St. Paul Children Deserve. And they make up the 29 different proposals and change that we have presented to our school district. And with that, I did see that there were a few questions that have come in. So why don't I stop there and see where your interest wants me to take the conversation next? Because otherwise I could, you know, I can keep talking about this, but let me see where your interests lie first. Do you want to read them or shall I?
I put these in some kind of order.
Okay.
And then you can just
Okay.
take it. So.
All right, thank you. How would you describe the administration's reactions to your proposals? Well, how would I describe that? They are, their reaction seemed a bit unwelcome, like these weren't necessarily welcome at the bargaining table. That they wanted the bargaining table to be about traditional wages and benefits, and that they appreciated our opinion on these matters, but they were inherent managerial rights. So it felt cold. Well, I guess that's the best way to describe that. If it seems that the district is hesitant or defiant in accepting the proposal that the Federation gives, how can you engage the community to apply pressure on the board, especially if the proposals will benefit students, specifically in closing the achievement gap? This is a great question too. One of the ways we are trying to engage the community is, well, first, by making sure negotiations are open and making sure people are welcome. Now that the district has asked for mediation, we did ask if the mediator would consider keeping negotiations open, but the mediator does have the right to close negotiations, and it's our indication that tomorrow night that's the intention, that negotiations will be closed. So we're doing a couple things. Most immediately tomorrow night and every night we negotiate, we have asked for a caucus room off of negotiations so that anyone who would like to be in the room but now can't could be there, so that when we caucus we can go into that room and share with folks what the progress we're making or the lack of progress we're making, and even just get like some quick opinions, right? Like, okay, they countered with this, what do folks think? You know, how are we doing? Do we feel like that's making some progress? And, you know, get some energy back. We do understand, however, that might not sound like the most engaging thing for someone to do, is to spend 3 hours in a room, maybe doing your homework or doing your knitting or listening to music while you're waiting to see if we come out and caucus. We want to make sure that's an option, but one of the things we're also doing is our teachers, our members, are taking it to the doors. And we've been knocking and handing, rather than that big document, we've turned it into a one-pager And then we also have a shorter synopsis that is in 4 different languages that if we reach a door where Hmong, Spanish, Somali, or Karen are spoken, we can at least give them a postcard size information about the details. Where we get them to the door and then we ask them to sign a petition that is calling on the school board to negotiate these items with us in good faith. So those are a couple of the things we're doing to engage the community. And I would say this. So I'll leave my information if you have community groups or parent groups or just your neighbors and you'd like to come have me present these, I'm happy to do that too. Oh, thank you. Clarification about site-governed schools. To clarify, self-site-governed schools, is it correct that the school board did adopt a policy on this, but the district has not moved forward to implement this, unlike Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and other districts, which are implementing such a policy? Our school board adopted a policy to develop a site-governed process, but we never got that process developed and adopted. And so the most movement we have right now is that the school board has agreed to a committee. Just to follow up on that, one of the things we did do in one of our 29 contract proposals that I can show you is we have restructured schools language we negotiated 4 years ago. And that is, at the time, we negotiated it because our schools kept being named in need of improvement or in need of restructuring, et cetera, and we had no process. And we had examples of, when there was no process, we had examples of that going okay, and we had examples of that just like with the wheels falling off of that process. And we said we need a way to let that school community know they still have some strength in decision making, and that, and we wanted to make sure they were empowered to make some of those decisions about restructuring themselves. So we created this restructured schools language that anytime the school board or a government, state or federal, named a school in need of restructuring, here is the process, here's the process you engage in to restructure that school. And we also gave that school permission, without having to come back to us as the union in the district every time. We gave that school permission to open up the contract in 5 different areas to negotiate things that are different from the rest of St. Paul Public Schools. So if you want to strengthen your school, or lengthen your school day or lengthen your school year, you can do that. If you want to change the compensation of the teachers in that school, you can do that. So there are 5 different things. And since doing that language, we micro-bargained, that's what I like to call it, because it's like negotiating a contract just for that school, not for all 3,000 of our teachers. We micro-bargained over 14 election-to-work agreements. And now election-to-work agreement is a legal term, because that's what it's called when you agree to something that is outside of our contract that you are still bound to. So for example, if one of the components was, instead of a 187-day school year, I have a 200-day school year. For example, I am electing to work those extra 13 days. So that's where that comes from. And so we had successfully negotiated 14 of these that did everything from just stretch the school day for teachers a little bit, or stretch the school year for teachers a little bit to make sure they had extra professional development around their program or around the programming they were going to implement, to stretching the school day for students and staff, to making sure that there were hiring provisions that were specific to that school. So we did a number of these, and because we weren't getting any traction on the site-governed schools, we came back with a proposal this time that said, now, we don't want the teachers or that school community to have to wait for a government entity to say they need restructuring. What if we have a community of, the parents and students and teachers who want to restructure? And I know restructure has, again, negative baggage to it. But because we already had this language where we had this process for how to reopen the contract and how to choose a new program and how to staff your school, et cetera, we added language that we proposed to the district that said, we want there to be the school to choose to restructure at some point if they would like to choose. Like, why wait until our school gets labeled as failing? If we see that we're not quite meeting the needs of kids the way we'd like to, why not give that school the power to restructure themselves? That was actually met with a counterproposal at our other two tables, not our teacher table yet, because negotiations were stalled because of mediation. At our other two proposals, with striking out all 4 pages of the restructured schools language altogether and asking for it to be removed from all 3 of our contracts. So that's where we are with that right now, but stay tuned. So I like to think my glass is half full, or my contract is half full. All right, next question. If the achievement gap involves students of color, specifically African American students, excuse me, how are you involving students and parents of that community within your public forums during contract negotiations? Fantastic question. So we are engaging with folks we know and asking them to engage folks they know. So starting first with our teachers from communities of color, specifically our African American teachers, if they would like to come, if they have friends, neighbors, relatives they would like to invite, especially if they're St. Paul parents. We are also working with Neighborhoods Organizing for Change and asking if they know anyone in their organization who would like to come to our negotiations. We're also working with Mentoring Young Adults, which is an organization run in St. Paul that is right now serving primarily African American students, and so we're inviting those students and their executive director in to do this work with us. And we're getting the word out sometimes at Hallie Q. Brown. We're putting up posters and reminders, and anytime we're running into folks, we try to get the word out as well. So that's the process we've been using. How do you believe school principals should be involved in the professional development of their school staff? Great question. There has been a movement, and it's with the right intentions, and we all know what intentions do for the roads you pave. There has been a movement to name principals as instructional leaders, and it is absolutely the right intention. But you can't just take a room full of principals and take your magic wand and say, poof, you're all instructional leaders. That also has to come with professional development, particularly if you never observed that principal as a classroom teacher, which is one of the reasons we wanted our language to cover any teacher who wanted to become a principal as well. That we said, again, to become a principal, you should have an evaluation on file showing you knew your way around a classroom first. And that qualifies you to be a principal. So I would say, and we still believe very strongly in that. It's not a negotiation priority this time. We actually believe in making it a negotiation priority for the principals, that they should be asking for it themselves. And I do believe in a principal maintaining ownership over her or his area of expertise. So if I'm a teacher working for a principal who used to be a music instructor, I don't necessarily expect them to come into my English language arts classroom and know my content. I certainly expect them to know some other things they should recognize, but I do expect them to be able to go into a music classroom and step in and do their work and ask me to come observe them. I do expect them to know another principal, perhaps another leader who I could go to who maybe was an English teacher. So I actually think that the more we rely on each other for our professional development, including our administrators, but then also teacher to teacher, the more authentic it'll be, because we are going to be doing more of that exchanging. But two, I also think the more admiration we will have for each other in talking about our strengths as well as our struggles. And we won't hide our struggles anymore because we will have had people sort of adopt us for our strengths as well. And so I would actually broaden that question out a little bit to say I actually believe principals and our peers should be involved in the professional development of our school staff. And then, not to be overlooked, it might be a huge budget saver too. And the fewer people were flying in from New York or Washington, D.C. or Chicago who seem to be the experts because they come with a plane ticket, as opposed to that teacher who teaches next door who seems to be pretty amazing at what they do. A couple other questions. Do we have enough ESL teachers in St. Paul? I feel like I don't have enough information to answer that question well. I would say, again, we have a pretty vibrant ELL population in St. Paul, and we have some really strong ELL teachers. I don't know that we have enough for what we're trying to do right now. But at the same time, we are in transition from ELL classrooms where we would bring all of our, for example, level 1 learners into a classroom to now trying to mainstream and cluster students in mainstream classrooms with some ELL support. Next question, what about helping students who are not literate in their own language? I think this is incredibly important, and it's one of the last things we ever do for our students. And one of my big lessons, I was privileged to visit Finland personally and see what the Finland phenomena was all about. And one of the things they are so mindful of in Finland is that every child, they believe every child deserves instruction in their mother tongue. And that's how they say it. And so there, again, that asset-based way of looking at a child who comes to school, as opposed to, oh, you don't speak English at home, there's a deficit, let's fix you, right? It is, let us embrace who you are, you deserve, and the right is with the child. The right is not with the school. They're an incredible, the way their laws are written in Finland, where the rights are with the child, that in and of itself is pretty fascinating. So the child has a right to be instructed in their mother tongue. And what they are seeing in research, what we are seeing in research, and when we have the chance to do it here in the US, is that the more literate you are in your home language, the more literate you become in every other language you are trying to learn. And so I believe it is one of the last things we do, but it is something that we should absolutely explore. What about helping English-only students learn a second language? Absolutely. One of the things we talk about in the School St. Paul Children Deserve is also access to world language, and that everyone should be a language learner. Again, with what we know, or what we purport to stand for when we talk about college and career readiness, we seem to miss the part outside of pure academics about what is really going to prepare our students to participate in a global economy. I had the privilege of being on the board of the Greater Twin Cities United Way, and we did this breakout session once a couple years ago, and I happened to be the token teacher at a room at a table full of CEOs. And so they were talking about what kids need. It happened to be an education conversation. And I just reframed things for them, and I said, what you need to understand about our St. Paul Public School students who are learning English is that you're going to want them as your employees. Because a monolingual student has no ability to code switch, or limited ability to code switch, right? Whereas your multilingual students have this hardwired ability to come in and out of a number of situations, and that is an incredible asset for you if your corporation is doing business in more than just your neighborhood. Right? If you're even just doing business, in trying to do it in 5 different St. Paul neighborhoods, or 5 different states, or 5 different countries, you want one of our students. And so we actually believe that we need everyone to have access to another world language. And we do not have a specific proposal on that yet, though, but I appreciate the brainstorm. Oh, thank you. All right, I'll try to answer these faster too, sorry. In St. Paul, what are we doing about the children not in any school? Well, I would say a couple different things. that I know of, and there are probably lots and lots of things that I don't know of. So one of the things our St. Paul district really took the lead on that we were supportive of was changing the dropout age from 16. They wanted it changed to 18, and it got changed to 17, which I think is progress. Now, we believe there should come with supports with that. We were very much in favor of that, just because, again, in world economy, I grew up on the Iron Range. And there used to be a time in my dad's generation, and maybe even a tiny bit still in mine, before Ronald Reagan ruined the iron ore industry for all of us. But there used to be a time when you could drop out of Hibbing High School and get a really good job sweeping the floor of the mines and work your way up. And those jobs just don't exist on the Iron Range anymore, and I don't know that they exist anywhere. And so that is one of the things we are trying to keep students in school. And I really appreciated St. Paul Public Schools' courage there. I think what complements that is our contract language talking about nurses and counselors and social workers and librarians there. I also believe our contract language that would promote site governance, because if you're just going to keep a student who is miserable in your high school, if we're talking about 16-year-olds, another year of misery in the high school, then let's find another option to engage that student. And again, so that could be site governance, that could be teachers being really creative, that could be a post-secondary enrollment option, which I know we are doing some of that in St. Paul, and so I do believe that is one way to answer that question. But there are probably things we're doing I'm not thinking of, and there are probably some other things we could be doing that you're all thinking of. So next. Is the usual salary lane schedule still the main vehicle for raises? Yes, it is. I would say another vehicle we have for actually a bigger raise, but it is not the main vehicle yet because we don't have as many teachers taking advantage of it yet, is we do recognize teachers who earn their national board certification with additional compensation. It is actually the most popular form of alternative compensation in the country to recognize national board certification. So I would say that's actually the most significant raise you could get by earning your national board, but we don't have a lot of teachers taking advantage of that yet. So, yeah.
If you're really working on, because that was my question.
Yeah.
If you're really working on teacher improvement, the courses they take are at their own choice. They pay for it themselves. And then basically there's no responsibility for implementing that in the classroom.
You are correct.
So it would seem to me that that would be one of the ways in which you could build a better teacher improvement program. If you could somehow, with your development of your assessment of the needs of teachers, recommend them in the courses. You can still take college courses or whatever, but you would recommend them into specific areas rather than what I see is let them take any courses, which within the broad range of education, which may really have no relationship at all. The minute you do that, it would seem to me you could expect them to get back from the class and have a plan now for implementing what it is related to the assessment you did.
I absolutely agree with you.
And nothing's happening.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree with you. And in 2007, when we were negotiating the 07-09 contract, I presented exactly that contract proposal and said, first, let's honor the fact that steps and lanes have been very useful for a long time. For a couple different reasons. Like, we never would have negotiated, the district and the union never would have agreed to, additional compensation for credits and master's degrees and things if at one point there wasn't seen either a need or a desire or usefulness for that work, right? We just wouldn't have done that. That being said, I do believe some things have gotten out of control about that. First of all, the biggest benefactor, even though I'm the person who gets the raise if I get a master's degree, the biggest benefactor is that college program that is like sucking all of their money from teachers because they know this is the only way we get raises. And I mean, these are their cash cow programs, right? And they are of varying degrees of quality. I think to a kind of a point you might be making. And so in 2007, we actually presented a proposal that said, let us move away from sort of catch as catch can college credits, and let's be really specific about the things we value in our teachers in St. Paul that are unique to St. Paul perhaps. And then we also think the advantage of this is building in retention of our teachers. Because for example, if I'm going to give you a raise for doing this because we know it meets the needs of St. Paul students, but I know that that's not recognized in the salary schedule of Woodbury or North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, or Roseville or something, I might keep you in St. Paul, which then saves me money in the long run. And at the same time, I'm getting a style of teaching from you, or an attention in your teaching from you, or something like that, that I know is really valuable to us. So I do believe that that is important. And so since they said no to us back in 2007, I do know that there has been obviously leadership change both on the board and on our superintendency. We have been moving more toward, and so I'm not saying that it wouldn't be just as valuable to bring back, but we have been moving more toward identifying teacher leadership characteristics that we would want to recognize. Because we do think there is huge untapped potential in making sure that our strong teachers stay in the classroom, and then they are recognized for the leadership they exhibit within their classroom. And so we are trying to identify what those teaching characteristics are, and then what is a way to compensate them.
Excuse me, sorry.
Should I get to? I can follow up. Yeah, okay. All right, is the fall convention with such low attendance worth the effort, or could those days be used for more productive activities for all? I enjoy the Fall Professional Conference, formerly known as MEA Days, because we don't have an MEA anymore. So make sure that at least in front of Education Minnesota, you call it the Education Minnesota Fall Professional Conference. And in front of me too, since I'm the daughter of an MFT member. So I actually get a lot out of it. It is pretty amazing, actually, the number of charter school teachers, because it tends to be some of their only professional development for some of them in the school year, and our student teachers who go there, and our master teachers who take our student teachers there. I have been interested in how we engage in that time differently. Just locally in St. Paul, I've done different things in the past. For example, the year Jonathan Kozel came to speak, knowing he was coming, we did kind of a book club first, and then did a lunch meeting with everybody, and then went over to hear him speak together and kind of debriefed afterwards. And I found that really useful. I have not tried anything on a grander scale than those sorts of activities. But I do think re-engaging in that time, it is a nice time of year to be reflective, which is probably why you find a lot of people reflecting on how beautiful the trees are, if they're not all knocked down by wind and rain. How do you allow enough time for the professional development to really follow through with the skills learned and see it in practice, or reflect and plan and support it? Fabulous question. We don't allow enough time right now. I mean, what I would like to see, ideally, my ideal day is actually less time with students. Not that our students are in school less, but let's open up that time. So for example, if I'm in a 6-period day where I'm supposed to teach 5 classes because I have one planning time period, I'd like to actually see 4 classes a day, professional learning time every day built in for that reflection, individually and with peers and with my administrator, as well as that planning time I still need to make sure that I have all my Just Right books, to make sure I get those grades in the grade book, to make sure I get that sweater returned to the lost and found, to make, all of those other things we have used planning time for the last 30 years and more. And so I don't think, right now with the factory model teaching schedule we have not built in reflection time. And I will share this quick anecdote. The year I was earning my national board certification and going through, and if you don't know this process, part of it is there are 4 portfolio entries you have to produce, and then there are 6 tests you have to take based on your content knowledge and some other things. And I was saying at the end of the year to a colleague of mine, I was just like, I don't know what it is about this year. I am exhausted though. And she said, well, of course you are. She's like, it's like you taught every lesson twice. Because I was finally doing the reflection on a regular basis, because I had to, because every day I was taping myself, and then I was bringing the lesson home and I was watching it and I was critiquing myself and writing down what I saw at 10 minutes and 32 seconds, and then at 11 minutes and 40 seconds. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I went through practically every lesson twice for months. And that's when I realized, We need reflection time built in. We're not going to do it if it's not there, because we feel like there are so many other things that we need to do. No one's going to order that bus for the field trip for us. You know, no one's going to grade our papers for us. No one's going to plan that lesson for me tomorrow for me. And so at the same time, no one's going to reflect for me either. And so I have to build that in. And if it's not directly meeting the needs of kids, because reflection is indirectly meeting the needs of kids, right? If it's not directly meeting the needs of kids, it's going to be last on my list of things to do. So we've got to build it in.
Right, Cathryn, one more question, I promise.
Okay.
We'll be done at 5. If you can stick around just a little bit.
Absolutely.
If not get asked, you can go up and talk with Mary Cathryn.
Yes. So there are 2 questions here about how to pay for the school St. Paul children deserve. So let me go to that one. Great question. The district, I read in the paper that the district said that our proposals cost them $65 million. And so I said, okay, well, that's a good starting point. But that's without any counter proposal yet. So if that is, for example, they said that just our librarian proposal alone would cost $1.4 million over 2 years. So about $750,000 in a year. So I said, okay, that's not so bad. So if that number is not right for you, this is where we negotiate. What sort of access to librarians can we afford? If it's not $750,000 worth of access a year, and we say we don't believe it's $0 worth of access a year, then what can we afford in a way that helps nurture that information literacy in our students? And so again, I read that the district said that our proposal cost $65 million over 2 years. We tend to negotiate settlements that are around $30 million. And that's usually just wages and benefits, and some things for like future educators of St. Paul and that sort of thing. And so I thought, we're actually not that far off yet. What can we negotiate that gets us there together? Because there's lots of area of agreement. It's not like my school district is less proud of our 4-year-old program than I am. They're bursting their buttons and at the work they're doing there too, even as they continue to want to improve. It's not like my school district doesn't want students to be information literate. They do. And so it's a matter of where are our priorities. I believe it is north of a $650 million budget. We are paying for things right now we need, but are we paying for things we don't need? Or are we paying for things we'd like, but we need this more? We need every child to have access to a school nurse more, simply because we don't want what happened to that child in Philadelphia a week and a half ago to happen to any of our children. We don't want it to happen to any child. We do want our students who need the support of a counselor and a social worker to have it, and to have it whether or not they have an IEP. Which is, it's important for students with an IEP to have that access too, but it might be important for all of our students to have access to it. And so, I will end there by saying, I actually think we're in a moment of saying, if these are the values we share, then let's talk about how we get there. And if we don't get there in this contract, then where do we firmly plant our foot in a step forward with a plan to get there eventually? And so that'll be our work tomorrow night and moving forward until we have a settled contract. So thanks so much for everything. I appreciate it.